Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. Now, on with our program. This is Mike Consul. Thank you for joining the program. In the spotlight during this episode is Lisa Unger.
Hi, I'm Lisa Unger, and I am the author of 20 novels of psychological suspense. I've been a writer all my life. I don't recall a time in my life before I defined myself that way. But of course, I was a reader first, as are most or all writers. That's where we fall in love with story in the pages of somebody else's book. So I've been, my mom was a librarian, and so I've been in love with story in all its different forms since I was a kid. So I'm very grateful to be able to spend my life writing novels. It's a dream come true.
And she's a very modest woman because she has sold millions of copies worldwide in 32 languages, and she's regarded as a master of suspense writing. And one of her novels, Confessions on the 745, is now in development at Netflix and will star Jessica Alba. Lisa, you are in a position that novelists dream about. Are you cognizant of that? Do you realize that you're doing what there are millions and millions of people all over the world trying to achieve?
I am aware of that, in that I feel incredibly grateful that I'm able to do it, because I know that so many people have this dream and that it's incredibly difficult to realize it, and it's incredibly competitive to get published in the first place, and it's even harder to succeed once you are published. So I am aware of that. It's been the writing life is not for the faint-hearted.
No.
There's lots of dizzying highs and sort of crushing lows along the way. But I don't, I never take it for granted, is what I mean to say. It's always something that, that fills me with gratitude that I've been able to come this far.
Well, take us back in time. Let's go to when your career started. You were writing, you were sending out, I'm assuming that you, of course, did what we all do, sending manuscripts out to agents. You probably had many false starts with writing. You probably had many rejection letters from agents, unless you're one of the very few lucky ones. I mean, clearly you're one of the few lucky ones, but talk about that first agent who said, "Hey, Lisa, I'm so-and-so, and I'd like to see the full manuscript, or I've read your full manuscript and I want to represent you, or I think I want to represent you." How did that first break happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had a little bit of a different trajectory than other folks do. I actually started writing my first novel when I was 19 years old. I started writing it when I was still in college. And, I had been writing ever since I was a kid, like short stories, poetry. Most of my education was focused on writing and literature. So it was very much a passion. And, I knew that it was what I wanted to do with my life. But my dad, was an engineer. And when I brought it up to him that I thought I would like to write, he basically just said, "Yeah, no, that's a terrible idea. You should be worried about getting a real job. And this is not a real job, and people don't do this for a living."
Is your dad alive and well now?
He is.
What does he say to you now? Has he ever made a statement to you that, "Lisa, I was wrong, you did it"? Anything like that?
No. I mean, in fact, I feel like I'm still like the equation that, he just can't solve. Like, it never should have worked, but it did. So, yeah, I mean, my dad is, my parents are both big supporters and fans and, and all that stuff. But, I think he still doesn't quite believe that I made it happen. And maybe he's just happy that he doesn't have to support me.
Well, you not only are you commercially successful, but you received 2 Edgar Award nominations. And it says here that was an honor held by only a few authors, including Agatha Christie. Now, simply nominations?
Yes. No, I didn't win either one of them.
But
I was nominated for a short story that year and for my novel that year. And I didn't win either of them. So, we just have to go with the nomination as a win in and of itself and be happy with that.
Absolutely. And
Just
it's
to
an
have two things nominated in a single year is kind of a big deal. Like that was very shocking and exciting. So,
yes.
yeah.
Well, and it's indicative of the fact that your novels are, I guess we can say, literary. In fact, you have said that you walk a fine line between literary novels and commercial thrillers. And all writers want to earn both commercial acclaim and have a large commercial following. But describe that dividing line you're talking about, or dividing lines between what you see as a literary suspense novel versus a commercial suspense novel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't define myself as either. I don't define myself as a literary writer or necessarily as a writer, just as a writer of psychological suspense. And I don't think most writers, when they sit down to write, especially when they start writing as young as I did at 19, I didn't have any idea of myself as being a literary writer. And I didn't necessarily choose to write thrillers. It was just sort of the natural evolution of my taste as a reader and the things that I was curious about and interested in. So I feel like, I feel like when I sit down to write, I have a character in my head. I have a character voice in my head. And it's that character that I follow through my narrative. And it just so happens that it's always suspense. And it also just so happens that I care very deeply about my writing. That's something that's really important to me. It's not just about telling a story or constructing a plot. It's just something that, I've always cared about as a reader and as a writer. So I'm not sure, like, I think these different, labels that they put on you, like your publisher will want to label you, the booksellers want to label you. And this is, primarily because they want to know how to market and sell your book, which is a very good thing. But as a writer, I think most of us, when we sit down, especially when we start as young as I did, we're just sort of following that passion and those voices in their head. And I think as long as you're doing that and continue to do that, then you're probably, writing in a way that's true to who you are, regardless of your labels.
Well, then critics also are discriminating about whether it's literary or not. And readers, I mean, I like literary style novels. I mean, you are said to emphasize character driven novels. And I think one of the things that happens in all forms of genre writing is that you do have a lot of authors who are very plot heavy. This is what you were alluding to. They're very heavy on plot, and they just zoom that story along. But the characters are almost like folding chairs. I mean, and they're cast aside very easily. You really are more focused on character driven novels, but at the same time, you've got a well plotted novel. Talk a little bit about that, the kind of that balance between, you want a plot that drives the reader forward, but at the same time, you want to take time to develop your characters.
Yeah, and that is always a balancing act. For me, it's all about character, and that's, where every novel starts. And that's true for me as a reader too. Like if I'm not deeply involved with character, then the plot matters to me not at all, right? Like you could just sort of, if you're like very into a book for its writing and for the way that you're feeling about the characters and how you're watching their lives unfold, like as a reader, that that sustains me more than any kind of plot concerns. As a writer, all plot flows from character for me. It develops on the page for me, much in the way it will develop for my reader. But in commercial fiction and popular fiction, thriller, crime writing, mystery, obviously pacing is also a concern. But I am, very much so involved in the lives of my characters and watching them unfold. And it's much more important to me to develop them so that when the heat and the action does come to play in the plot, then my readers are going to be as involved with my characters as I am, because it doesn't matter what happens in a book if they're not there for the character, for the love of character.
Right. If you don't care about the character, it's kind of incidental if they get their head chopped off or something like that.
Exactly. I mean, it's like a lot of times you see books that start with a propulsive beginning, or even film, television, it starts with a very action oriented scene. And for me as a viewer or a reader, like that just leaves me cold. Like I'm not interested in that, like, that exciting or propulsive beginning unless I'm, deeply involved with that character. And how can you be if you've only seen them or been reading about them for a page or whatever?
Now, you have said that you don't plot your novels. I mean, you start the writing, and I don't know how much is in your head in terms of just generally, this is what I'm writing about. But you don't actually, and I think this is kind of unusual particularly for a genre writer, to not plot the novel. How does it work for you? How do you actually, because I tried writing novels without a plot and I wrote myself into a corner now. So how do you kind of approach that?
Well, so for me, there's usually a germ or a seed or, something that I'm obsessed about, that I spend a lot of time researching. Like, so for example, with Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six, which is my 20th novel, I had some things that were, very much on my mind, like DNA testing was something I was really interested in. I'd been researching, the industry and the technology for a while. And then, my family and I took some, during the pandemic, we took some vacations to secluded cabins in the woods, right? And so, like, my thriller's mind kind of got twisted around some of those places that we stayed and like what could go wrong here. And so it was like those two things were what were interesting me or obsessing me at that time. And then I started to hear, for me, the first voice that, brought me into the book was a character by the name of Hannah. She was a young mom, and she was gathered with her family at dinner when everybody suddenly is given as a gift a DNA test. And so that's all I really knew about the book when I first started. I had Hannah's voice. I had a sense of her as a person. She's like, struggling in her role as a new mom, about to like leave her daughter for the first time to go away with her husband. And, just has this kind of script that's been written for her. Like, she's the good girl in the family, the mediator, the one who like cleans up everybody's messes. Right. So I had this idea of her and who she was. And so the way it works for me is I just, start writing that scene or following that voice that I hear in my head. And the story just starts to build and develop from there. And it does unfold for me on the page, much in the way that it would for the reader. Like, I have maybe an essence, an idea of sort of what the book is probably going to be about in terms of, some big themes or big pieces that I'm interested in. But there's certainly for me, there's no outline. I'm not sure who's going to show up day to day. I don't know what they're going to do. I have a vague sense of what the book is about, but I definitely don't know how it's going to end. It's almost as if I write because, I write for the same reasons that I read, because I want to know what's going to happen to the people living in my head. And so, I mean,
but you want it to reveal itself.
I do. I want it to reveal itself. And the best way I can explain it is that, I've been reading since I was a kid. I've been writing since I was a kid. And I find that a lot of people who do write the way I write have that. They have been writing since they were children, and it's almost like somebody like didn't tell your brain that it had to stop telling stories, right? Like your brain never got the memo. And then spending all my years as a reader and then studying craft and studying the novel and studying, screenplays, it's almost as if like the form of the story form is like is something internal to me. And so it's just the way my imagination unfolds.
Right.
Of course, this is all first draft stuff. There's second and a third and a fourth and a fifth draft, where, there's less magic and more craft that comes into play. But truthfully, at the end of that first draft, structurally, I'm pretty close to where the novel is going to be. There's going to be editorial work, of course, but it's not going to be like a restructuring or like this didn't work or, oh, what, because it's just not the way the story unfolds for me.
Right.
Right. I'm going to be writing, click, click, click. And then, I'll run into some kind of a, like a speed bump or whatever. I'll get up and walk the dog or go to the gym or do whatever. And then I'm going to feel or hear or see the next thing. And then I'm going to go back to the manuscript. And that's kind of how it unfolds for me. There's not a ton of intellectual decision making, It's not like I'm sitting around thinking, what's going to happen next? What is this character going to do? What do I want that character to do? I don't have any of those thoughts. I don't make
Right.
any.
Right. Well, you have a solid sense of structure because you've read so much and now
Yeah,
you've written so much as well.
exactly.
So Lisa referred to Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six. That's her latest novel. It sounds, on the surface like it might be an Airbnb advertisement, but because it says a novel under there, and because it's in the suspense section of a bookstore, and Lisa Unger's name is on it, just that title alone, Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six, you can imagine that the sorts of things that are going to happen. And the readout on this is three couples rent a luxury cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway to die for in this chilling locked room thriller by New York Times bestselling author Lisa Unger. So when you were staying in cabins, did you have some sleepless nights? Because you allow your imagination to, I mean, this was kind of a research project in addition to being a vacation. So did you have some sleepless nights at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always have sleepless nights. That's like sort of the natural condition of the writer, right? Yeah, I mean, I feel like the problem with going on vacation, especially for me, is that like I have to take myself with me, because like any kind of downtime that I give myself, my imagination just kind of, takes flight. It's almost as if I can't see any type of beautiful or idyllic, setting without going, I wonder what could go wrong here, So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I did. There was all kinds of things that, were curious to me. I mean, the whole Airbnb thing in general, not that this was an Airbnb rental, but we did rent some cabins in like the Blue Ridge area and the Asheville area. And, we just sort of, really, it's something that we just do and that we have done. And I thought, I started to think like how much we take for granted when when you just get online and rent someplace and then you just go there and you move your stuff in and you live in this house, and it's just such an odd thing that we all that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't even an option, right? Like it wasn't like, it's like this internet dating for your house now. And so that was one of the things. And then I started thinking about the lock codes on the door. Does everybody get that same code, or is it different for everybody?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's all those kinds of things that you start thinking about. It's like, wow, it's really isolated. There really isn't anybody else around. What does that mean if something goes wrong? How would we get help? Like all this different kind of stuff. Cell phone service was spotty. We did have a couple of nights of, very bad weather. And so it's mainly just, but, it's not like, this isn't the way my brain works because I'm a thriller writer. It's more like I'm a thriller writer because this is the way my brain works. So
Yeah.
I've always
But
kind
it
of
is,
type of thing.
you mentioned the code. I mean, I get it because I just spent about a week in New Orleans with my wife and a couple of friends. And we go up to the door, and my wife was the one who made the reservation. She had the code, and she says right out loud, "So the code is this and that," and it's like neighbors are right there,
You're like,
and
hello.
it's
Yeah.
like don't say this out loud. and,
Right.
and people listen sometimes. I mean, your imagination can certainly,
Definitely.
run amok.
For
Uh,
sure.
Now, you're also said it said that your writing is often experimental. In what ways does it veer into the experimental? What would you consider to be experimental about your writing?
So strange. I have heard this a couple times. I've gotten this question a couple times about my writing being experimental, and I really have no idea what that means.
Well, I pilfered that right off your website. I pilfered it right off your
I
website.
don't know. I know that
Somebody
somebody
must
said
have wrote
it.
that for you.
I know that somebody said it about me, but I don't know who it was. I think that there might be on the website there might be like something that is I don't that I'm not aware that I'm not aware of. I just don't I don't know that you could consider my writing to be experimental in any other way than, I follow my character voice, and, I go where the story demands to go, and I follow it to its conclusion. And, I have all kinds of questions about, the human psyche and the mind, the brain, and how, things work. And so there are, in some cases, in some of my novels, they do sort of, kind of dip their toe into the supernatural, but only in the most Jungian sense, only in the sense that, the brain, there's nothing but questions about the human brain. We know more about space than we do about our own inner galaxy, right? And so I think that when people say that, I think that that's what they mean, that I'm just willing to go wherever the story takes me. I'm not confined by formula or what people think a thriller should be or any of that stuff. I'm just gonna honor the story that wants to be told.
So a lot of, I think, writers out there think in terms of getting famous, being successful, and having people handling things for them. But I see a lot of infrastructure in your on your website. And by infrastructure, I mean you've created a platform. You've got the homepage, of course, and the books, and then you've got the about page. But you also have news and events, and you have a blog, and you have a newsletter, and there's contact information. There's a listing of places that your bookstores you're visiting to do readings and meet readers. How big a deal is, I guess I want to ask this on a couple of different levels. How big a deal is it to have this platform in place? And how big a deal is it for you to have to maintain it to whatever degree that you do to keep it? And I guess, thirdly, whether this is something that you really enjoy, or is it just, hey, I have to do this because this is what keeps things, the momentum high?
Yeah. It's such a layered question and a layered answer. How important is it? I think that in this modern age, to have a place where you can interact with your readers, booksellers, other authors, all that, to have that, between your website, your newsletter, social media, I think that, it can be a very powerful tool of discovery, and also, sort of interacting in real time with people that want to be connected to you. So I think it can be a powerful tool. I most of the work of social media and the newsletter and all of that stuff is done by me and my husband. All the content that you see out there is me. I provide it, and all the dissemination is done by my husband Jeff, who's been sort of my partner in crime for almost 20 years now, in terms of he's always been the IT guy, the tech guy, the guy in the chair, we like to call him.
Does he know? Does he know when you have had? I mean, can he tell the difference when you've had a good or bad writing day?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Talk about what kind of mood or personality do you bring to him on a good versus a bad day? How was he able to discern between the two? What's the difference?
I mean, I think that everybody knows when I've not had a particularly good writing day. I feel a little bit unmoored, when I'm not solid in what I'm working on, or if there's been days where there's been too much promotion and not enough creative time, then I'm not my happiest self. I can get maybe just a little bit cranky.
Yeah.
Not terribly so. But we have this funny thing that we talk about, that you have, when you write the way I do, it's a very organic process, right? So with all organic process, there's an ebb and a flow, and you have to be as comfortable in the ebb days as you are in the flow days, because those ebb days are where everything is kind of gestating, and you're going to, it's when you're waiting for the next moment or feeling or vibe or whatever. And I always have this feeling that my manuscript, kicked me out, right? It just was okay, that's it. I'm done with you. Get out. And so then I'll go down to Jeff, my office is on the top, and, his office is down a flight. And I'm it's not working. I can't do this. I don't even remember how to write a novel. Right. He's yeah, I know. It's okay. Why don't you just go back up there and go back to work? I'm okay. And then it lets me back in, and it's all good again. And it's just kind of that's just the normal process, especially when you work together, and you work in the same house. It's you're going to have those kinds of interactions for sure.
So talk about the writing process. You have, like any writer, you must have a routine.
Mm-hmm.
What is your routine for getting a novel written?
Well, I mean, my golden creative hours are from 5 a.m. to noon. Those are my best hours always. It's the closest as I can be to my dream brain. The earlier I can get up and get working before everybody is awake, before the world starts to wake up, the better it is. Of course, I'm also a mom, so I don't always get those hours. I'm a professional writer, so I write whenever. I write every day. I have, if I don't work in the morning, I work in the afternoon. So it's not like anything precious, like, oh, if I can't work in the morning, I can't work at all. There's no preciousness to my routine. But if left to my own devices and all is well, I'm at my computer by 5 or in my notebook or whatever and writing until my daughter goes off to school. And then I have another really big chunk from like 7 to noon. And those are really important hours. And I feel like over the years, it's like the idea of inspiration and, when it comes and is it elusive and all of that. It's like, yes, inspiration comes and part of the process is magic, but a lot of it is just discipline. A lot of it is just being there for the magic to happen. And after so many years of writing in this way, like for me, that's the time where, it feels like a magical time where flow is most available to me.
So 5 to noon is a lot of hours.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely putting in the time. Is caffeine involved?
Of course.
Okay, so there's caffeine. What about food? And if there is food, I suspect maybe you would never eat a large meal because it would just deplete your energy.
There's very, very little food early in the day. Yeah, like just maybe like toast or something like that, just to get, some energy, like toast and peanut butter or something like that, and just get the energy going. And then, yeah, not very much. No, you're right about that.
So is there anything else about those hours? Do you do anything? Do you have a ritual? Do anything ritualistic? Anything you do? Any incantation? Any way you start the process, or anything you do along the way, or even a little a talisman somewhere? Is there anything that you would point to that it's kind of like makes me idiosyncratic or ritualistic?
I mean, I would say quite the opposite. Yeah, I don't believe in rituals or props or any kind of tool or talisman or anything, like much in the way that, I tried not to rely on those things when I was like, putting my daughter to bed at night, because when you lose those props, if there's something that gets taken away, or you don't have your ritual, or you can't do your ritual, then does that mean you can't write? Like I can't have that kind of preciousness in my process. The most important thing is that, I've set my intention to be solidly creative and not to be distracted by the more shallow work of marketing and social media and stuff like that. I don't toggle between the creative work and the other work of marketing. So that's the most important thing for me, is that I've set my intention, and that, I have my desktop doesn't have access to the internet. So I work there on my fiction, and then my laptop, where I'm, talking to you through that right now, that's on a standing desk in another part of my office. And that's where I do the other work that I do.
So do you do some of your writing standing?
Oh yeah, sometimes I do. Mm-hmm.
So your desk is adjustable so that you don't have to be sitting in a chair the whole time.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So where did you grow up, Lisa?
I was born in Connecticut, and then my family traveled. We lived in the UK and the Netherlands. Then came back to New Jersey, where I went to middle school and high school. And then I went to college in New York City. I started at NYU and graduated from the new school. And now I live in Florida.
What did you study in college?
Writing and literature.
Okay, so you knew. I mean, you said you
I
started
did.
at 19. You knew
Yes.
your direction in life, what you wanted to do, and you
Yes.
live in Florida now,
Yes.
um, unaffected by the hurricanes recently, I hope.
Luckily, yes, we were spared the worst of that.
Now, Florida, does Florida give you any your novels are not particularly set. You're not like Carl Hyacin. Carl Hyacin sets all his novels in Florida about, reprobate developers and politicians and that sort of thing. You move around in terms of your venues,
I
correct?
do. I tend to, my books tend to mainly be set in the Northeast. I have a fictional town called the Hollows. I, go back to New York City quite a bit in my fiction. I still spend a lot of time there. I still consider it my second home. But recently, just some Florida settings have started to find their way into the novels. But again, that's another organic thing. Like I couldn't choose to write about Florida. It has to like find its way into the work, and it definitely did so in Secluded Cabin.
Right. Now, what about understanding the human psyche? Obviously, that's a big part of what you do is you're playing on that psyche, understanding the human psyche in terms of your characters, maybe thinking about the readers to some degree. Have you done any formal study on that? Or to some degree, we all understand the human psyche because we've got one, although a lot of times we don't understand ourselves that well. But then we
Right.
know a lot of other people who's in kind of their phobias and such. Have you done, I guess what I'm getting at, it has to do with research or any ancillary education that you may have um, uh, brought into your life.
Yeah, I mean, I took quite a few psychology courses in college. And then, I always, say about my life that it's kind of like a continuum, right? Of research, reading, experience, and writing. Like it is one of my deepest curiosities is, what makes us who we are. What turns one person into a hero and another person into a murderer, or is it nature, is it nurture, is it some impossibly complicated helix of both of those things? And so I spent a lot of time just researching and talking to people and paying attention to people when they talk to me and observing. I mean, I think, the natural condition of the writer is to observe. We spend a lot of time looking and thinking and researching just in our presence, in our lives and in the world. And then of course there's just, nonstop reading. I'm also a news junkie. I'm constantly sort of, taking in news from all different sources. So it really is kind of a continuum. Like if I had something really important that I wanted to explore, I'd start, as we all do, on the internet. If I need more, I'm going to find a book or books that I need to read and kind of dive into. And if I need even more than that, then I'm going to find somebody who's willing to hang out with me and to talk to me. So, yeah, it's just kind of an ongoing research is a big part of my process, and it's an ongoing part of my life.
So, in addition to the 20 novels you've written, you've also written a novella and
Mm.
in 10 short stories. Is that still accurate? 10 short stories you've written?
I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I think that's right. I've just written another one. So maybe 11 is accurate.
So
Just
what Yeah, I mean, what about the obviously you prefer the novel format. I mean, that and also it's what's worked for you. Your readers expect to get a full-length novel. But what about short stories? Do they actually give you the space you need to deliver in a condensed form something that might have been a novel? I mean, are they kind of like a Twilight Zone episode?
yeah, it's really interesting. I very recently fell in love with the form of short story writing. And I love writing short fiction. It's not they're not abbreviated novels. they're their own thing. They're their own little vignettes or stories that exist exactly as they are. They're like these perfect little spheres of story. And I can do that. I can write a short story while I'm writing a novel. Like I couldn't write 2 novels at one time, but I find that I can compartmentalize enough to have like a short story going while I'm writing a novel. And it provides like a little, it's like a mental break that nourishes. And when I go back to the novel, I often feel fresher for having written a short story. A novel is like a long relationship. It's a relationship that takes place over a year, sometimes more. A short story, I'm not sure, it could be any amount of time from 2 weeks to 3 months or whatever, but it depends. But it's about, it's like this burst of energy and creativity. It's often very intense. So it's just completely different. They're completely different places for me to create, and I enjoy both. I enjoy both for different reasons.
What do you try to accomplish with a short story? I mean, is it kind of a beginning? Do you think in terms of a beginning, middle, and end? Would a short story end like one of your novels ends, or are you trying to do something aside from your novel writing?
I mean, again, it's really about character and about character voice. It's like who shows up, what do they have to say, what do they want to do, where are we going to go with this? And it's not the same. It's not totally the same process as writing a novel. But it's not dissimilar in that, I'm not going to outline my short story. I don't have the sense of the beginning and the middle of the end until I'm in it. So in that way, it's kind of the same process.
Gotcha. So how much public speaking do you do?
A lot.
What is generally your content? So you're in front of an audience and you're going to, I mean, aside from reading, for instance, you go to a bookstore, let's say, here's an author appearance, and you're going to probably read excerpts from your latest novel. But if you're other than that, what kind of content do you try to deliver to your fans or the people that you're hired to speak to?
Well, I find that most people really want to just hear about the trajectory of your life and your career. Most people, readers, who come out to these events are very interested in how you got from aspiring to published. They love to hear that the story about, me being, a young writer, and like asking my dad if he thought I could write and him saying no, like just the details of your life I have found are more interesting to your audience than kind of anything else. And then I talk about the book, the most recent book what inspired it. Usually I don't dive really deep into what it's about. I'll give them a teaser of what it's about. Most people don't come to hear you talk exhaustively about your novel. But talk a little bit about that. And then usually when I open it up to questions, we talk about things like, similar to this conversation, what is your routine like? What inspires you? Where do you get your ideas? When do you write? Why do you write? How do you deal with the business of publishing? Those are a lot of the questions that come up, like titles and things like that. And and so it's pretty much that. It's pretty much that type of talk, and it's always like a little bit different. It's always a little bit different depending on the audience and who's present and what they want to know. But I try to be really there for my audience, because usually if they've come to see me, they're already fans, they're already readers, so they want to connect. So I try to be really present for the group and just say, hey, I'm just going to start talking, and then hopefully it just turns into a chat, and that's generally what happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So have you ever lived something approximating one of your novels? I mean, in terms of something death-defying or just plain frightening?
Well, I mean, I guess the thing that I point to most often is that, when I was 15, a girl in my school, a friend of mine, was abducted and murdered.
Mm,
And
wow.
it was this very, obviously horrific episode in our town, which was like this very sleepy kind of semi-rural New Jersey town. It's like the kind of place where you move your family to be safe, and everybody felt safe. And she wasn't, like my close friend or my best friend, but she was somebody who, we played violin together on the school orchestra. And she missed her bus and she walked home, which should have been completely fine because a lot of people walked home, and she never made it home. And it was this terrible tragedy, and something that, sort of changed the way I saw the world. Like the world was one thing before that happened and another thing afterwards. And so I had a lot of questions. I already had a lot of questions, but I had a lot more questions after that, like why her, and how could this happen? And, who was this person, and why would he ever, hurt a young girl in that way? And so I feel like in some ways that I was already a writer and I already had a lot of dark sort of curiosities. And this event, really broadened my my need to understand why people are the way they are.
Now, did they catch the guy?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they got you ended up finding out what happened just in terms of what his motivation was. I mean, obviously he had something wrong with him to do something like that.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been traumatic.
Yes. And it did eventually wind up, it wound up not the full retelling. I never wanted to do that. Like I never wanted to tell the story of that, that time, and, my friend, because I never wanted to cause anybody any more pain than they'd already endured. But there was a piece of that story that I brought forward with me, and that was mine to tell. And that piece sort of found its way into a novel entitled Fragile.
Mm.
And I was about 25% into the book when I realized, oh, okay, here it is. It's finally found its way into the work. And it was almost like I had this story, I had this piece that I brought forward, but I needed to be better. I needed to be a better writer. I needed to have written 8 novels. I needed to have become a mother and a wife, and to understand layers of what happened when I was a kid that I could never have understood then at 15. And so it's like, in some ways it's kind of illuminates my process and how it works. It took, many years for that piece to metabolize itself into the work.
So you're a mother, you mentioned that a couple of times. How many children do you have?
Just one, and a Labradoodle.
Oh, you have a daughter or son?
I do, a daughter.
Okay. So, have you ever met one of your characters outside your book? I mean, met somebody who's like, and let me tell you why I'm asking this question. Stephen King walking down the side of the road, and a van comes along and hits him, nearly kills him. He's unconscious. He comes to, and he told this story that there's a guy sitting on a rock, saying, well, something to the effect of, well, look at the kind of day I'm having. I go and hit Stephen King. He knew who he was. And he basically said, well, help is on the way. But there was the things this guy said and who he was. He said, the guy was a character right out of one of my novels. And now that's an extreme case because Stephen King was, badly injured, almost killed. Unfortunately recovered. But have you ever met people out just in your everyday life where it's like, wow, that person just feels suspiciously like this or that character?
Yeah, I have had a couple of them. Certainly nothing like that. Certainly nothing to that extreme, but there are a lot of times where I see somebody and there's just like some kind of energetic output from that person that makes me incredibly curious about them. And, like I might watch somebody. I'm not going to say that I will like follow that person, but like, if I was in the grocery store, maybe I would make myself, there's a couple of circumstances like that where you just see somebody and that they're going to do something bad, or they're thinking about doing something bad, or they're creating chaos for some reason or another. So yeah, I've had plenty of experiences like that. I've had a guy who like walked into a gym where I was working out, and I swear to God, he was like a character that was in one of my earlier books, like exactly the way I would have envisioned him. And yeah, there's some weird stuff like that, but mostly they just kind of exist in my head. And
yes,
luckily for everybody,
you wouldn't want him. You wouldn't want him showing up too often.
Not too often. We don't want them showing up too often, because then we're starting to get worried about things.
I lost my train of thought here. Let me see here. I wanted to ask you about, you have this Netflix program that's in development, but you also have several novels. It was my understanding several of your novels have been optioned over the years, not greenlit yet, but they've been optioned. Can you speak now, to begin with? If it's optioned, they're paying you money kind of for the right to hold it. They've got first dibs on it. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I mean, depending on who options it, whether it's a channel or whether it's a producer, or whether it's an actor, they option it with the intention of trying to shop it around, basically. Like they need to pay for the right to do that. In this case, it's an option, but Jessica Alba received the book. She fell in love with it. She brought it to her producers. So already we have the actress and the producers brought it to Netflix, and they have agreed to they were the ones that created the option for the whole team. They found a writer. So there's a writer now, Charisse Castro-Smith, who wrote Encanto and also the Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House. So very, very successful, excellent writer. So we have the writer, there's a script. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. In the past, we've never come this far before. So yeah, it's great.
So if somebody is listening who I've never read Lisa Unger, and obviously you would want them to get off to a good start with you, what novel would you tell the new reader would be a good kickoff?
It's so funny because it's, when people ask me that, I always ask, well, what do you like to read? Because the books are all very different. They all have different layers, and all my characters are really different. My publisher will tell you, read the new hardcover. and in this case, it's probably a good entry because it is a standalone. It doesn't tie into some of my books chain linked by character and by my fictional town called the Hollows, even though anyone, you can enter the world from any portal, right? Like they all kind of stand alone. But I think Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six is probably the best place to start.
There you go, the most recent one, and I'm sure that you feel that your writing and storytelling has become more proficient over time. Like
certainly hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's normally the case. So let me ask you, if you could go back in time and meet your 25-year-old self, what would you tell your 25-year-old Lisa Unger if you could go back in time? What would she need to hear from you? And it doesn't have to be writing necessarily. Just what message would you want to deliver to your younger self?
I think
with the benefit of your experience now.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because at 25 years old, I was working in publishing. I was a book publicist. And that was the moment in time where I was writing the least, right? Like my job had gotten so big that, I had let this novel that I started when I was 19, I had kind of just let it lay fallow. And it was right around that time that I started to have some epiphanies about my life, that this was the only thing I ever wanted to do, and that, I had to get really serious about it at some point. And so I think what I would tell her is that, you can do this, you are this, you've always been this, and in your heart, that. And my years in publishing kind of gave me that permission, right, to understand that, in fact, writing is a real job and people do it. And if you have that desire to do it, maybe you can do it too. So I think I would just tell her to, have faith in this thing that you've always known, and, you can do it and you will do it.
Well, what about when you were 25 and you had this job that was consuming you and keeping you from the writing? What did you end up doing?
Well, so I just had this epiphany where I realized that, I was going to have to look back at myself 5 years, 10 years down the road and go, you know what, you never even tried to do this. And so I got very serious about finding the time to write every single day. And so if that meant getting up super early in the morning before work, if that meant writing on the train, if that meant staying in, this is before I was married, before I had a kid, all that stuff, it was just me and my job and, my life. And so I got very serious about if I had, if I was going to stay in on the weekends to work on the novel, whatever it had to be, I was going to work on that book every single day until it was done. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And I did eventually finish it.
What has been
that was the first book that I got published.
It was. Okay. So that commitment really paid off for you. And
yeah, it took a long time. It took a long time to write it.
Yeah.
But eventually that was the one that was my, I was signed on pretty quickly by Elaine Markson, who was a big literary agent. And she has since, became ill and passed away, but she was my agent for 13 years. And she was the first person to really believe in me, to say, yeah, you can do this. We can do this. And she was able to broker a 2-book deal with St. Martin's Press for the book that I had written and for the second book that I was already writing.
What was the title of the first one?
Angel Fire.
Angel Fire. Mm-hmm. So, what is this is a difficult question, I realize, so I won't blame you if you take a pass on this one, but I'm curious what the most influential book you've ever read is. And it doesn't have to be a novel. It may have been a nonfiction book that played a role in your life.
Yeah, I would say, of course, as a lifelong reader, it is a difficult question, but I would say the book that impacted me the most was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
That was powerful. I remember reading that in school.
Yeah, it was a powerful book. And, I was already in love with his language. I was already, from, especially his short fiction and vignettes, like Other Voices, Other Rooms, and Music for Chameleons. So I was already in, just in love with his writing. And then when I read In Cold Blood, and I was young, too young to be reading it. But I just felt so moved by the way he examined darkness and, these, very damaged, broken personalities, and did so with, just tremendous empathy and compassion, and it felt like it gave me permission to look into the darkness, to see what was there, but to do it, with a deep respect for humanity.
So tell me, if you were organizing a dinner party and you could invite any 3 literary figures, whether dead or alive, who would you invite?
Okay, well, for sure the Bronte sisters. Absolutely. Because, I have a lot of questions about the books, about their lives, about what it was like to write when they were writing. And so for sure that, and also Stephen King.
And Stephen King. He was a big influence on you as well, huh?
Huge influence, influence, absolutely. He's just iconic, and his storytelling is beyond, that of, I mean, I can't think of anybody who even compares to him. And for on all different levels in so many different ways. And so, yes, I would definitely, that's my choice. A little bit, a little bit eclectic, but there you go. That's what it is.
Well, Lisa Unger, thank you for taking the time. And for our listeners, Lisa's URL to her website it's in the episode notes, so you can see all of her books there and learn more about her there. But Lisa, thank you for the time. You've been generous with it, and congratulations on all your success.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a great conversation.